Hello, and welcome to Contemplative Dying. I am Kelsey, and I'm a death coach and a death doula. I'm making this video tucked away in my husband's office with a really bright, beautiful sun right next to me, and this sweet plant that I love. And my two kids are running around downstairs and both screaming and fighting and laughing and playing. So if you hear them, that is simply the music of my life. I am a little bit sweaty in this room right now from the sun. But I want to make this video because I made my website that I'm super excited about that shares a lot of information about what I do. But I think that sometimes, instead of reading all this information, it's easier to listen to somebody talk about what they do. So I want to talk a bit about what it means to be a death doula and a death coach and how I got into this work. I got into this work almost 4 years ago, actually 3 years ago, a little bit over 3 years ago, when my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. When he was diagnosed, it had already moved to his brain, and we were completely shocked. The reality of death in my life had never been experienced in this way. I was in disbelief and went through all the different stages of grief that do not happen in any which order, but the disbelief and the anger and frustration and the confusion. And for me, when I found out my dad's diagnosis, when I found out he was going to die, essentially, it was like this crack opened up in me. And when it opened up, there was this dark crevice, and everything that I thought was true just fell into it. Like everything I believed that was real about life fell into this crack when I found out my dad was dying. And all that was left was the desert land on top. And it was like it felt like I was wandering through the desert. Like, death can be so disorienting. Like, I couldn't figure out what steps to take. Everyone else's life was moving on around me, but my whole life all of a sudden had changed. Like, everything had changed in an instant. And so throughout my dad's cancer journey and throughout, the process of him dying, there was this insufferable pain. This pain that broke me and my family too. But amidst that pain, there were also these moments of wild awakening that I've never experienced before. Moments where the reality of death was so present in my face that it made me think about my life completely differently in recognizing that I don't have tomorrow promised. And what does that mean for me? Like, looking at death made me want to live such a different life. And for me, I'd never looked at death in that way because I'd never experienced death in that way before. So it just was this very expanding process, both painful and awakening. And, I think of this one moment with my dad. He was pretty close to the end, and we were in his room, and he at this point was just so tiny and had gotten so small and frail, and he could barely stand. But in this moment, he looked over at me and he saw just the welling in my eyes, and he saw, just that I was broken, and the thought of life without him still to this day wrecks me. But in that moment, he saw the pain in me, and he looked over at me and he said, "Kelsey, come here." And he stood up. And I looked over at him and I stood up and I walked towards him, and he grabbed my shoulders and he said, "Hug people like this." And he grabbed me close and he pulled me into him, and he held me so tight, and my whole body in that moment just started to weep and weep and weep. And when I think about that moment and I think about that dark crevice that everything fell into, that darkness, it's almost like his hug in that moment put me back together. And it's like the love that he gave me in that moment, it's like it didn't take away the pain, but at the same time, it helped me feel whole again, because I'd been feeling so broken. It's like his love reminded me of my wholeness. And I think about that moment and how powerful that love was, and how it was the reality of his coming death that made way for me to experience this intense and beautiful love. And I started to just really sit with the concept of death in this whole new way. Because that was one of so many moments where, in the face of death, I just felt awakened to life. And so it was like this kind of confusing but like expanding process of, gosh, death is so painful and breaking, and like it could feel, there were some moments that did feel dark, but then also at the same time it was so life-giving. I felt like alive, and I felt like I wanted to live my life with presence and with love, because it was, his death was reminding me that of my death. And so it was this really expanding experience for me, in both painful and beautiful ways. And it just shifted who I am. So after he passed, after he died, I went to school for studying end of life. And I went to the Conscious Dying Institute, where we studied what it means to be a death doula and a death coach. And, now I'm able to do this work that I love so much, and I feel so privileged. As a death doula, I'm walking with a couple families right now, and what I do as a death doula is I create safe and loving spaces for people who are experiencing a terminal diagnosis. And so I work with the individuals who are dying, to do some legacy work if they want to step into anything to honor their lives, like writing letters or gift giving, or having family conversations. And I also work with the families in their grief and create safe spaces that echo back to them, like however you're feeling, the darkness, the light, the apathy, like I normalize all of that. And then I do some education for educating families on what the body actually goes through at end of life. Because sometimes we just are, when we find out a loved one is dying, we're just in a state of shock and we don't know what to do or how to move. So I kind of help families come up with, a bit of a rhythm, and help them learn how to work within this new reality that they're facing. And as a death coach, I am working with people who actually are not given a terminal diagnosis, but people who want to befriend death and who want to learn how to live with eyes that Saint Benedict says he placed death before his eyes daily. And what that can do if we learn to look at death instead of avoiding it or denying it, is it can really create this new path for us, that opens up this new way of living that really cherishes each day, the moment, what we have here and now, and that can really invite us to live a different life than what we've been living. I know for me, death has done that in my life. And then on a really practical level with the death coaching, what I do is I help people put an end of life plan in place, so that they actually have their will and testament in order. They have all their medical wishes in order. For in the case of a tragic and sudden death, they have letters to, if they have loved ones that they want to write a letter to, or kids that they want to write a letter to, they have those in order. They have their wishes of what they want done with their body in order. Because again, none of us have tomorrow promised. And so really putting this stuff in order helps the family a lot in the event of a tragic death. And then looking at our lives and looking at our deaths in this contemplative way really invite us to live consciously for the here and now. So for me, at the end of the day, what I experienced in death is that, as painful as my death experience has been, as painful as death can be, it's more than that. Death is an invitation to remember to live every day for the now. And I love having the opportunity to walk with people and facilitate spaces that remember that. So if you're interested in this work, I have my website, I have my phone number on my contact page, and I would love to hear from you and to talk about what your interests are, because I know for me, this work has been so life-giving, reframing how I view death in order to live a more conscious life here and now. So that's the work I do. Thank you so much for listening.